He did it in front of everyone. That was the part that made it what it was. Not a private cruelty, not a quiet dismissal, not the kind of wound that happens in a room with only two witnesses. He did it in front of everyone who mattered in that room, in front of her colleagues and her peers and her supervisors and the people whose opinions shaped what was possible for her in that industry. He stood at the front of a room full of people and he used her work, her ideas, her research, her months of effort, and he presented them as his own. And when she stood and said something, when she found the courage to say in front of all those people that the work was hers, he looked at her with the specific cold contempt of someone who has decided that a person is not worth the effort of a real response, and he said something that the room laughed at, not because it was funny but because rooms laugh when someone with power invites them to, and it is easier to laugh than to be the person who does not. She left that room with the work stolen and the dignity gone and the sound of the laughter following her down the corridor. She drove home. She sat in her car outside her apartment for a long time. And she made a decision that she would keep for years, a decision not about revenge, not about justice, but about what she was going to become on the other side of what had just happened. And years later when he came to her, when the same man who had stood at the front of that room and invited a room to laugh at her was sitting across from her in a different room asking for something only she could give him, she had to decide what kind of person she had become. Stay with me. Because what she decided in that second room is the most important moment in this story. Welcome to Bishop Tales, where every week we bring you powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories that stay with you long after the video ends. If you are new here, please subscribe right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from tonight. Are you in Nigeria, Ghana, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, South Africa, Jamaica, or somewhere else in this world? We love knowing where our family is. Now let us begin. Her name was Adaeze Okonkwo and she was 27 years old on the day it happened, and she was working as a junior research analyst at Meridian Capital Partners, one of the more established investment advisory firms in Lagos, where she had been for 2 years and where she had been building a reputation through the specific combination of intelligence and meticulous preparation that serious research work required. She had studied economics at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka and had come out with a first-class degree that her department head had described in her final year assessment as the product of a genuinely analytical mind rather than the product of hard work applied to memorization, which was a distinction that mattered in research because research required the first quality and could not be replicated by the second. She had come to Meridian through a competitive application process that had involved a written assessment and 3 interviews, and she had performed well enough across all 3 stages that the head of research, a woman named Mrs. Olatunji, had told her directly after the final interview that she had been their first choice. She had taken the compliment and gone to work. The 2 years at Meridian had been productive in the way that the early years of a career are productive when the person is genuinely capable and in the right environment. She had worked on 6 major research projects and had contributed to all 6 at a level that went beyond the standard junior analyst contribution. She had a specific quality that senior researchers noticed and valued, which was the ability to find the thread in a large body of information that connected the apparently disparate pieces into something coherent and useful, the ability to see what the data was actually saying rather than what the question had anticipated it would say. She had been noted in 2 internal performance reviews as a high-potential analyst with strong trajectory. She had been given increasingly significant portions of research projects to lead. She had been, in the 2 years of her time at Meridian, building something quietly and consistently that she had every reason to expect would compound over the following years into the career she had been working toward since her undergraduate days. The man's name was Kelechi Adaeze. He was 41 years old and a senior investment director at Meridian who had been with the firm for 9 years and who occupied the specific position in the firm's hierarchy that was senior enough to carry real authority and not yet senior enough to carry the accountability that full seniority brought, which was a position that suited his particular approach to the work. He was polished and well-connected and had the specific social intelligence of someone who understood how rooms worked and how to position himself within them to maximum effect. He was not a poor analyst. He was a competent one. But there was a gap between his competence and his position in the firm that he had closed not through the quality of his thinking but through the quality of his relationships and his presentation of other people's thinking as extensions of his own. He had done this with junior colleagues before. He had the specific confidence of someone who has gotten away with something multiple times and has therefore concluded that it is not something to worry about. Adaeze had spent 4 months on the research project that became the occasion for what happened. It was a major sector analysis for a client who was evaluating a significant investment in the West African logistics and infrastructure space. The project required the kind of sustained and comprehensive research effort that was the specific strength of someone with her qualities, the ability to hold a large volume of information and find the structure within it, to build an argument that was supported by evidence that was specifically chosen rather than generally accumulated. She had worked on it through evenings and weekends in the period when the deadline was approaching. She had developed a methodology for evaluating infrastructure investment risk in emerging market conditions that was her own intellectual contribution to the project, a framework that her section head had reviewed and had said was the most genuinely original thinking she had seen from a junior analyst in several years. She had written the full report, 120 pages, and had presented it to Kelechi, who was the senior director on the project, for review and final presentation to the client. The client presentation was scheduled for a Thursday morning in the firm's main conference room. It was attended by the client's representatives, by the firm's managing partner, by several senior directors including Kelechi, by Mrs. Olatunji the head of research, and by several junior analysts including Adaeze who had been invited to attend as the lead researcher on the project. She had been told she would present the methodology section, the section that was her specific intellectual contribution and that she had developed from the ground up. She had prepared for this with the thorough preparation she brought to things that mattered. Kelechi presented the full report. He presented every section including the methodology section. He presented Adeeze's framework as though it were his own thinking, developed from his experience and his understanding of the sector. He was fluent and confident and the room received the presentation well. When he finished and the floor was open for questions, one of the client's representatives asked specifically about the methodology framework, asking who had developed it and what its theoretical foundations were. Kelechi said he had developed it over years of working in the sector. He said it drew on his experience of evaluating infrastructure investments across multiple African markets. Adaeze sat in her chair and felt the specific cold of what was happening move through her. She had prepared the methodology section. She had built the framework. She had written the theoretical foundations from her own research. She knew this. Mrs. Olatunji, sitting 2 seats away from her, had reviewed it and had attributed it to her specifically in her internal feedback. The managing partner who was in the room had seen the project attribution document that listed her as the lead researcher. She looked at Kelechi. He did not look at her. He continued answering the question with the fluency of someone who has no awareness of the presence of the person they are speaking over. She raised her hand. The managing partner acknowledged her. She stood. She said with the specific controlled calm of someone who is using every available resource to keep what they are feeling out of their voice that the methodology framework had been developed by her over 4 months of research and that she could walk through its theoretical foundations in more detail if that would be useful. The room produced the specific quality of silence that rooms produce when something uncomfortable has happened that nobody knows how to respond to. The client representatives looked at Kelechi. Kelechi looked at Adaeze for the first time since she had stood. He looked at her with the cold contempt that she had not yet seen from him but that would become the defining image of that morning in her memory. He smiled. He said that junior analysts made important contributions to projects but that contributions and authorship were different things and that Adaeze was perhaps not yet experienced enough to understand the distinction. He said it with the lightness of someone who has delivered a dismissal in a form that the room could receive as a joke. Several people laughed. Not all of them. But several. The managing partner said something that moved the meeting forward. Adaeze sat back down. She did not say anything else. The meeting ended. People filed out. Kelechi did not speak to her. She went back to her desk. She did not cry because the specific quality of what she felt was not the kind that produced tears immediately. It was the kind that produced stillness. She sat at her desk and she was very still for a while and she thought about what had happened with the full honesty of someone who does not allow themselves the comfort of a managed version of difficult information. The work had been stolen. The theft had been performed in front of every person in that building who shaped what was possible for her in that environment. She had spoken and had been made a joke of by someone senior enough that the room had laughed. The managing partner had let it pass. The head of research had been in the room and had said nothing. She was sitting at her desk with all of this and she was deciding what to do with it. She sent an email to Mrs. Olatunji that afternoon. She said she wanted to discuss the morning's presentation. Mrs. Olatunji replied that she could come to her office the following morning. She went home that evening. She sat in her car outside her apartment for a long time. Then she went upstairs and she made herself dinner and she ate it properly and she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened without management or suppression. She was angry. She was hurt in the specific way of someone who has been publicly diminished by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. She was also, beneath the anger and the hurt, something else. She was clear. She was clear about what had happened and what it meant and what she was going to do about it. The clarity was not comfortable. It was useful. Now friends, I need to stop here because if you are watching this and you feel the specific injustice of what happened to Adaeze as something in your body rather than just something in your mind, you are exactly where Bishop Tales wants you to be. Please like this video right now and drop a comment below. Tell us, have you ever had your work or your ideas taken by someone with more power than you, and what did you do? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do it right now because what Adaeze does next and what she builds over the years that follow and what happens when Kelechi comes back is something that nobody in that conference room could have predicted from that morning. The meeting with Mrs. Olatunji the following morning was a precise and honest conversation. Adaeze laid out what had happened with the specific clarity of someone who is not asking for sympathy but for accuracy. She said the methodology framework was her intellectual contribution, that Mrs. Olatunji had reviewed it and had attributed it to her in written feedback, and that the presentation had attributed it to Kelechi without her knowledge or consent. She said she had raised this in the meeting and had been publicly dismissed. She said she wanted to know what the firm's position was. Mrs. Olatunji listened with the careful attention of someone who is hearing something she already knows and who is deciding how to navigate the specific difficulty that the knowing creates. She said she was aware that Adaeze had developed the framework. She said she had spoken to the managing partner that morning. She said the firm valued Adaeze's contribution and would ensure it was properly documented going forward. She said the situation with the presentation had been unfortunate and she regretted that it had happened the way it had happened. She said nothing about Kelechi. Adaeze noted the absence of anything about Kelechi. She said she understood. She said she wanted it on record that she had raised this formally. Mrs. Olatunji said it would be on record. Adaeze thanked her and left. She sat at her desk and understood with the full clarity she had arrived at in her car the previous evening what the meeting had told her. The firm was not going to address what Kelechi had done. The documentation would be updated. Nothing would change for Kelechi. She was junior and he was senior and the firm had made its calculation about the cost of the two things and had arrived at the conclusion that every similar firm in similar circumstances arrived at. She understood this. She had not expected anything different. The meeting had not been about changing the firm's decision. It had been about making sure her position was on record and that she had conducted herself with complete integrity throughout. Both of those things were now true. She turned back to her work. She left Meridian Capital Partners 4 months later. She left through a normal resignation process, giving full notice, completing her outstanding projects to the standard she had always maintained, leaving documentation that was thorough and professional. She did not say publicly why she was leaving. She told Mrs. Olatunji in her exit interview that she had an opportunity she wanted to pursue and that she was grateful for what she had learned at Meridian. This was true. Mrs. Olatunji said she was sorry to lose her. Adaeze said she knew. She said she hoped they would have reason to interact professionally in the future. She meant it. Mrs. Olatunji said she hoped so too. What she was leaving for was not another firm. It was her own. She had been planning it since the evening she sat in her car outside her apartment and made the decision about what she was going to become on the other side of what had happened. She had spent 4 months finishing her commitments at Meridian and simultaneously building the foundation of what she intended to start, developing the business plan, identifying the first potential clients, preparing the methodology framework that Kelechi had stolen in the Thursday presentation into a full proprietary research product that was formally documented and legally protected as her intellectual property from the day she completed the documentation. She had done this work with the focused attention of someone who has been given a very clear reason to do it and who intends to use the clarity. She registered Okonkwo Research and Analytics on the Monday after her last day at Meridian. She set up her office in the small spare room of her apartment, which she converted into a working space with the specific deliberateness of someone for whom the working space was a declaration rather than a convenience. She identified her first 3 target clients from her network and from the specific knowledge she had accumulated at Meridian about which businesses in the Lagos investment and financial services space were underserved by the available research offerings. She contacted all 3. 2 of them agreed to meetings. One of the meetings produced a first engagement within 3 weeks of the company's registration. The first engagement was small by the standards of what the company would eventually produce. It was a sector research report for a mid-sized private equity firm that was evaluating its exposure to the logistics sector, the same sector she had spent 4 months researching at Meridian. She delivered the report with the full weight of her capability and the specific advantage of knowing the sector better than almost anyone in Lagos of her age and experience level because she had spent 4 months developing a methodology for evaluating it that was genuinely her own and that she understood from the inside in a way that nobody else did because she had built it. The client received the report and said it was the best research work they had commissioned in 2 years. They retained her for a follow-up project. She had her second client before the first engagement was complete. She built the company across the following 3 years with the specific patience and thoroughness of someone who has decided that building correctly is more important than building quickly. She added 1 hire in the first year, a junior analyst from her Nsukka network who had the quality of thinking she had learned to identify during her time at Meridian. She added 2 more in the second year. She developed the proprietary methodology into a full research platform that she licensed to 3 institutional clients alongside the bespoke research engagements that remained the core of the company's offering. By the end of the 3rd year, Okonkwo Research and Analytics had 12 active clients, a team of 7 analysts, a reputation in the Lagos investment community for the specific quality of its research output that had been built entirely through the testimony of clients rather than through marketing, and a revenue figure that Mrs. Olatunji, had she known it, would have found considerably more than adequately impressive. Adaeze had thought about Kelechi across these years in the way that you think about something that was genuinely wrong and that you have processed honestly and that you have decided not to carry as a defining wound. She had thought about what had happened with the full honest weight of it and she had understood it for what it was, a man in a position of authority who had used that authority to take something that was not his because he could and because the environment had allowed him to. She had not minimized it. She had not constructed a more comfortable version of it. She had simply put it in the right place, the place where things that were done to you and survived went, the place that informed the direction of your building without consuming the energy of the building itself. She had heard about Kelechi across the years through the network that connects people in a professional community the size of Lagos, heard about him in the specific way that people hear about colleagues who shared a professional space with them for a period and who continue to occupy that space after the departure. She had heard that he had been promoted to managing director at Meridian 2 years after she left. She had heard that the methodology framework that she had developed and that he had presented as his own had been incorporated into the firm's standard research approach and was now described internally as a framework developed under his leadership. She had heard these things and had noted them with the specific quality of someone who notes information accurately without allowing the noting to become a weight. She had her own framework, documented and legally protected from the day she had formalized her company. The theft had been real and it had produced its consequence, and the consequence was that she had built something without it that she would not have built with it, at least not in the same way and not at the same time. She held this honestly. In the 4th year of Okonkwo Research and Analytics she received a call from a number she did not recognize on a Tuesday afternoon. She answered. The voice on the other end was the voice she had last heard in a conference room making a joke at her expense that a room had laughed at. He said her name. She said yes. He said it was Kelechi Adaeze. A silence. She said yes. He said he was sorry to call out of the blue. She said go ahead. His voice had a quality that was different from the voice she had heard in that conference room 4 years ago. It had the specific quality of someone who has been reduced by something and who is navigating the reduction with the dignity that is available to them. He said he had left Meridian. He said it had not been entirely by choice. He said there had been an audit of project attributions across the firm's research output over the previous 5 years and that the audit had produced findings that had made his continued position untenable. He said this with the flatness of someone who is reporting a fact that is painful and who has accepted the pain as appropriate. She said she was listening. He said he was consulting independently now and he had been approached by a client who needed a specific kind of research support, the kind of support that required the infrastructure and methodology of a properly established research firm rather than an individual consultant. He said the client had asked him to identify the best available research firm in Lagos for the specific project. He said every credible reference he had consulted had pointed to Okonkwo research and analytics. He said he needed to ask whether she would be willing to consider the engagement. He said he understood if she was not willing. He said if she was not willing he would understand completely and he would not trouble her further. He said he also wanted to say something else before she responded. She said go ahead. He said he had behaved toward her in a way that was wrong. He said wrong was insufficient but it was the accurate word. He said he had taken her work and presented it as his own, and when she had said something he had used his position to dismiss her in a way that was designed to humiliate rather than to answer, and he had known what he was doing and had done it anyway and it had been wrong. He said he was not saying this because he needed something from her, or rather he acknowledged that it appeared that he did need something from her, but he wanted to say it regardless of whether it changed her decision about the engagement. He said he had been thinking about it for 4 years and the thinking had been clearest in the period since the audit, when the mechanism of what he had done across his career had been made visible to him through the audit findings in a way that had removed the distance he had been maintaining from it. He said he was sorry. He said it directly. He said it without the qualifications that people add to apologies when they want the apology to cost them less. Adaeze sat at her desk in the office that was no longer the converted spare room but a proper professional space in a building on Lagos Island that the company had moved into in the 3rd year, and she held the phone and held the apology and thought about what she was going to say. She thought about the conference room. She thought about the car outside her apartment. She thought about the decision she had made that evening about what she was going to become on the other side of what had happened. She thought about 4 years of building the right thing in the right way for the right reasons. She thought about the laughter. She thought about what she had said to herself in the car, which was that the person she was going to become was going to be defined by what she built and not by what had been done to her, and that building from bitterness produced different structures from building from clarity, and she was going to build from clarity. She said she had a question before she responded to either part of what he had said. He said yes. She said she wanted to know what the engagement was. He described it. It was a comprehensive market entry analysis for a significant client who was evaluating expansion into 3 West African markets, a project that was exactly the kind of work her company did at the highest level of its capability, and that was the kind of engagement that would be good for the company in terms of both the work itself and the profile of the client. She asked the scale of the project and the timeline. He told her. She asked about the budget. He told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she was going to respond to both parts of what he had said. She said she accepted the apology. She said she accepted it not because what had happened was acceptable but because she had decided 4 years ago that she was not going to carry what had been done to her as the organizing principle of her professional life, and accepting the apology honestly was consistent with that decision. She said she did not say this to be magnanimous. She said it because it was accurate and she was always accurate. She said she hoped he understood the difference between accepting an apology and finding what had happened acceptable, because those were not the same thing and she was not going to pretend they were. He said he understood the difference. She said good. She said she would consider the engagement. She said she would have her business development manager send him the firm's standard engagement terms, and if the terms were acceptable to the client she would schedule a briefing meeting. She said the engagement, if it proceeded, would be conducted at the same standard as every engagement her firm took on, and that standard was not going to change because of the personal history. He said he understood. She said one more thing. She said she wanted him to know that the methodology framework she had developed, the one that had been presented in that conference room 4 years ago, was formally documented as her intellectual property and had been from the day she established the firm, and that her firm's research platform had been built on it. She said this not as a threat and not as a point-scoring exercise but because it was a relevant fact about the firm's capability that a client evaluating the engagement should know. He said he knew. He said he had followed the firm's development. She said then you know what you are asking for. He said yes. She said good. She said she would be in touch. She ended the call. She sat at her desk for a moment. She thought about the laughter in the conference room. She thought about the stillness at her desk on the day it happened. She thought about the car. She thought about the decision. She thought about 4 years of building from clarity rather than from bitterness and what the building from clarity had produced. She thought about the woman who had stood in that conference room and said something and had been made a joke of and had sat back down and had not said anything else and had driven home and sat in her car and made a decision. She thought about what that woman had become and what the becoming had required and what it was worth. She called her most senior analyst into her office and told her there was a potential new engagement to brief her on. The analyst sat down. Adaeze described the project. The analyst said it sounded like exactly the kind of work the firm did best. Adaeze said yes. She said it was. She said she wanted the briefing meeting scheduled for the following week and the preparation done with the full standard of everything they did. The analyst said of course. She said was there anything particular about this engagement she should know? Adaeze thought for a moment. She said yes. She said every engagement was particular and this one was no different. She said bring everything we have because this client is going to see what this firm is actually capable of, and she wanted there to be no ambiguity about what that was. The analyst said understood. She left. Adaeze turned back to her screen. The engagement proceeded. Kelechi's client agreed to the terms and the briefing meeting happened the following week, and the meeting produced the specific response of a client who has encountered work of a quality they had not quite anticipated, the response of genuine engagement with the substance of what was being offered rather than the polite assessment of something adequate. The project ran for 3 months. Adaze's team delivered at the level she had described to her analyst, the full level of what the firm was capable of, which was considerable. The client said at the final presentation that it was the best investment research they had commissioned in recent memory. They retained the firm for a second project without waiting to be asked. Kelechi sent a message after the final presentation. He said the work had been everything he had told the client it would be. He said he was grateful she had agreed to take the engagement. She replied that the work had been strong and that she was glad the client's needs had been served. She said it with the professional warmth that she brought to all client communications. She did not add anything personal. She did not need to. Everything that needed to be said had been said in the phone call and in the work and in the 4 years of building that had produced the work. The rest was in the record of what had been built and who had built it, a record that was clear and comprehensive and entirely hers. Mrs. Olatunji called Adaeze in the 5th year of the firm's existence to say she was leaving Meridian and was exploring her next steps and wondered if Adaeze would be willing to have coffee. Adaeze said yes. They met. Mrs. Olatunji said Adaeze had built something remarkable. She said she had followed the firm's development closely. She said she was sorry she had not done more when she had had the opportunity to do more. She said she had made a calculation about what was possible and the calculation had been wrong in the way that calculations based on the preservation of existing conditions were always wrong, because existing conditions did not last as long as people assumed when they were deciding what was possible within them. Adaeze listened to this with the full honest attention she brought to things that deserved it. She said she appreciated the honesty. She said she had understood at the time why Mrs. Olatunji had made the decision she made. She said it had not been the right decision, but she understood why it had been made. She said she bore her no resentment. Mrs. Olatunji said she was glad. She said she had hoped Adaeze would say something like that. She said she had always known Adaeze was going to be fine. Adaeze said she had always known it too. She said what had happened had simply clarified the timeline. Mrs. Olatunji said yes. She said that was exactly right. She said it had clarified the timeline and the direction and the scale and the independence and essentially everything important. Adaeze said yes. She said she was grateful for the clarification. She meant it. Not with bitterness and not with the performed grace of someone managing their presentation. She meant it with the genuine honesty of someone who had looked at the full picture of what had happened and understood that the worst morning had produced the clearest direction and that the clearest direction had produced the best building and that the best building was what her life had become. The conference room had been the beginning. Not of what had been done to her. Of what she had done after. Of the car and the decision and the 4 months of finishing her commitments and simultaneously building the foundation and the registration of the company and the converted spare room and the first client and the proprietary methodology and the team of 7 and the office on Lagos Island and the reputation built entirely on the quality of the work and the engagement from Kelechi's client and the phone call with the apology, and the second project and everything that was still coming and would continue to come because the building had been done from clarity and building from clarity produced structures that lasted. He had humiliated her in public. He had stood in front of everyone and invited the room to laugh and the room had laughed. He had not known, because people who do that kind of thing rarely know, that what they are producing in the person they are humiliating is not the defeat they intend but the specific and powerful clarity that comes from being reduced to the essential question of who you actually are when the reduction is complete. He had not known that she would drive home and sit in her car and ask that question and find the answer and build the answer into something that would bring him back to her 4 years later asking for what only she could give him. He had not known any of this. She had not known it either in the car. She had only known the decision. The rest had been the work. The work had always been the point. If this story reached you tonight, please share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Like this video and subscribe to Bishop Tales for powerful emotional stories every single week. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from, and tell us this: has someone ever humiliated you publicly and what did you do with what they gave you? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. There are many more stories coming and they go deeper than this one every time. Thank you for watching Bishop Tales. We will see you in the next story.